Hey guys, and welcome to this week's video. I'm here with another masterclass. We released the first one on Canaan's Reapers, and people were very positive about it, which is fantastic. People enjoyed it. People took things away from it, which was what we wanted. We wanted to sort of touch on strategy that maybe people didn't see in a warband. And so we're back with another one. And today we're going to be doing Morgok's Krushas. And you might be thinking, oh, what's a strategy to go with these guys? Just run them forward. Well, there's a bit of strategy. We'll go through that in a bit. We're doing Morgoks because I'm comfortable talking about them from a strategy standpoint. There are a lot of warbands that I haven't played much of, and it's kind of hard for me to go through and give in-depth strategy without having play tested in the bonus. So I'm going to stick with warbands that I know I've experience with. As time goes on, I am playing with more and more warbands, so my experience will grow, and I'll try and target popular ones. But for now, we're going with Morgoks. In the description will be 2 decks. I'm going to link 2 decks. The first deck I'm going to link is one that I used at the start of the year to much success. I was using it in a lot of tournaments. I used it in all our Wednesday meetups that we had, and it pretty much went undefeated. I think I had very few losses, if any. Very solid deck, but because of the recent file list change, it was no longer viable. I think it had 9 restricted cards in it. So I put it in there for context so you can see in what I used to run. The current deck I've put in there is a current championship legal deck, and that's what I currently run. I've played some games with it. It's good, but I haven't got nearly the amount of games on this deck that I did the last one. There might be some little refinement in it still. And as more cards come out, obviously we'll change those around. So just giving you a bit of context on those 2 decks and what they're for. And we're going to start with Morgok's Krushas. The most important thing with Morgok's Krushas is winning the roll-off at the start of the game. Your game is so much easier if you can place boards second. I went through board placement in a previous video, so if you want more in-depth about that, please check that video out. But with Morgok's Krushas, you really want to go straight on with them. If you have to go off the side a little bit, it's bad. Look at this board set up here. I think you can see it on this camera here. If you look at this, if you're playing against, we're going to say Seraphon, we'll put them as our dummy of the day. They can be the punching bags. You got 3 fighters at the front here. Look at this, beautiful. Look at that. You can get these fighters in there. You can charge into there. You can charge into there. You can turn 1, you're in their territory. You're killing them all. But if they place boards first, and they decide to offset you. Let's make it a hard offset, shall we? I'm going to spin this around completely and go 4 hexes that way. Should be able to see that there. If you look at this board, you might even be able to see it because I'm starting so far back. I've got a starting hex here. Let's put him there. It doesn't go on the fighters in a second. The next closest to enemy territory is probably there, and then it's probably there. So this board for starters is not great for obviously for the reactive setup. But like my first turn is 1, 2, 3. I only charge if there's a fighter there, which might not be. This guy doesn't even get into neutral territory, and this guy here probably gets a charge off. Maybe. If he moves that back, then actually, no charge at all. So getting that first board placement is very important, but obviously you can't fix your dice. Sometimes, and probably half the time, maybe more if your opponents aren't quite in the know, at least half the time you might have to place something like this. So let's talk about what you can do to stop that. Let's talk about boards. So these are 2 boards here. I've got this board. If you look at it, the starting hexes are very elongated, right? These 2 corners here haven't got much going on there. So up in this top corner here, there's no starting hexes, there's 1. And here, there's 1 here as well. So if you're offsetting, it's very easy to deny them coming in. Now, if I flip this board over, suddenly I've got a very different sort of starting hex here. You can see they're sort of more spread out. They're more to the extremes. There's not many that are really close in these 4 middle squares. You can see on every offset, there's 1 that's close and 1 that's sort of a little bit better. The best deployment here for the Seraphon player will be something like this. Just at a glance, I'll probably sit here and study it and come up with more intricate ones. And it's not great. You're still like that, or maybe you're like that, probably like that. It's not a great start. You can get 2 charges off. This guy here, though, unfortunately, is not going to be going very far. So look at your starting boards. You need to really, before you go to a tournament with Morgoks, you need to look at all your boards you own. You might not have this board. This is the Arena Mortis board. A lot of people aren't buying that. That's a topic that is not going to be covered here at all. But if you haven't got all the boards, you need to look at all your boards and find out which boards for you are good in 2 situations. 1, which board is good for placing first. They've said, you know what, you can place your board first, I'll choose orientation. And what you're looking for there is boards with starting hexes towards all 4 corners. Also think about longboarding, right? Longboarding here wouldn't be too good because there's 2 here and 2 here. So both longboards are kind of giving you 2 in enemy territory. You want to have 2 starting hexes that can get into enemy territory no matter what their orientation is. That's pretty complicated, but that's it. The second kind of board you need to look at are the ones that are probably closer to this one. And that is, you've got lots of starting hexes towards one side. When you're placing second, this is a good board for you. You can choose orientation, you can make it work. You can even offset a little bit here if you really wanted to. And you could still get into enemy territory easier. Offsetting like this is a bit more of an advanced tactic, but for your sake, find the boards that have these great starting hexes. If you're playing in a best of 3 tournament, you'll need 3 of them because you have to play a best of 3 and you can't use the same board twice. So look at your boards, study them, know, okay, I'm placing first. Don't sit there and look at your boards and go, oh, is this one good? You should know. You should go in the tournament and say, okay, first game, the best one for me in this situation is this board. Okay, I'm placing first. Let me find that board. Yep, bang, down. Don't waste time figuring it out on the day. Do it when you're at home the night before. Write down which board they are. Describe them if you can't remember the name of them, but do it that way. I go on a lot about boards because Morgok's games are heavily influenced by board orientation. If you get offset, it's an uphill battle. If you're straight on, yeah, it's super easy. You just have to make some dice rolls and you should win the game. Anyway, move on to the next section now, but boards is the main piece here. Make sure you think about them. The next topic we're going to cover is deck building. Previously, it was just easy. You just took all the best cards and threw them in. Region of Glory, Deserve Confidence, Nerd to Pain, all the great ones, you threw them in. With I say recent file this change, it's recent for us because we've been stuck in lockdown, haven't had many games since that's come out. But that kind of gutted a lot of Morgok's decks. Some warbands escaped that harm-free. For example, my Kanan's Reapers deck I talked about in the last video, I had no changes to that deck when that file list came out, because I only had 3 restricted cards. My Morgok's deck, like I mentioned earlier, has 9. So the question for you is, what restricted cards do you use in your deck? Once you've got your restricted cards, you can start looking at sort of building it properly. And we've got a video on that as well, surprisingly. You know, there's lockdown, these strategy videos, we're kind of covering all aspects of the game here. There's 2 restricted cards in the Morgok's deck that I think are almost required, I think. And they're very important for keeping your fighters alive. And you might think 5 wounds, don't need to keep them alive, but I think actually, if you can put a couple of cards in to keep them alive and then stack the rest with damage, that's really good. The 2 cards are a Nerd to Pain. It's -1 damage. It's a Morgok's faction card. The other one's Berserk Fortitude, which I think is probably the greatest card in the deck, in my opinion. That's how I think it is. -1 damage is great. It's like getting +1 wound every time they attack you, essentially. Like a great Fortitude every time they hit you. So it's just a great card. It saves you having to put a lot of defensive cards in there because you want to kind of be attacking them, but you also don't want to be losing your fighters. There's a balanced strike there. Berserk Fortitude's great because it's a gotcha, right? Your opponent will come charging in, they'll have 5 damage on a fighter, and they'll hit you, and they'll get through because they've got 10 dice, and then suddenly you play Berserk Fortitude, and then you take off your WAR tokens, take that damage down to 1, or whatever number you can get it to, and you're not dead. And their game plan was to come in and kill you, and you have just stopped their game plan, not through anything they can control, just by having a card in your hand. There's some really meta strategy as well when you have Berserk Fortitude in your hand and you haven't played it, or it's in your deck in a best of 3, is just keep a ploy in your hand. If you've got 5 upgrades, just play 4 and keep 1. And they'll think you have Berserk Fortitude. Good players will see it and go, he might have it, I've got to overthink this. And you can bait people out and get advantages just by pretending like you have the card. Obviously, don't lie to them, but if you just hold a card, as soon as you play that upgrade, they'll be like, oh, he's got no ploys, he hasn't got it, he'll charge in. So those 2 cards are important. For the 3rd card, really it comes down to your preference. My preference personally is a Surge Objective. I think that objectives are the most important part of your deck, and having surges that you can cycle through quickly are super important. And the most important surge for my current deck is Show of Force. And I think Show of Force is a great card because it is a surge that you can score turn 1 very easily by moving into enemy territory, and turn 2 and turn 3 easily by having 3 upgrades, because you're generally stacking on 1 fighter anyway. So by having that card, there's no point in the game where that's easy or hard to do. For example, a surge like Scrum is really easy for some warbands to do turn 1, turn 2, but turn 3 you draw Scrum, you're like, I've got 4 fighters left, I've got to get them all together. Like, it can be difficult for them. But I think Show of Force is good. You can use it all through the game, and it generally doesn't upset your game plan. The other one is obviously staying on an objective in enemy territory. That's an objective I don't run. And that's because later in the game, when you want to be sort of finishing off foes, turn 3, you draw that, And sometimes you got to do some mental gymnastics to get yourself onto an objective that can also make an attack. Sometimes you're choosing between one or the other. So that's why I picked those three. From there, your deck building can go a lot of ways. I personally like to go for as much passive glory as I can. Aggro warbands like upgrades. Once you start getting upgrades, you start killing more and more. So getting those first few upgrades are important to get the kills. Then you get the kills, you get the glory, then you snowball. But that initial snowball, that initial few glory, if you just rely on your base stats, you're not going to get kills. So I recommend going out and getting some passive surge, stuff that you don't need to be hitting on attacks for, just to get a few glory, then whack your upgrades down, and you'll be fine. You'll be taking out more people than they can think of. Next up, I want to talk a little bit about war tokens. They're kind of a core part of how the warband inspires, how they play. They're important for inspiring, and then they're kind of a tool that gets you just some nice little buffs. On the deck building side, there are a few cards that people use to get war tokens. Eager Advance and Brutal Attack are honestly two almost must-include ploys for your deck. They do two things, which is +1 dice and a move, a sidestep, in addition to a war token. So you basically get something you want to do anyway and a free war token on top. Great cards. I recommend them in a lot of games. If you get them turn one, you can pop one of those down, do a charge, and you've inspired someone, or vice versa. The other card that I see a lot of people run, it's a card that I actually don't like very much. It's White Energy. Basically, you roll a magic dice, and it's a 50-50 on all three of your fighters to get a war token. I don't run it because, one, it doesn't do anything else. It just gives you a war token. And you know, when you're competing with something like +1 dice is like my standard ploy. When I think about what's a good ploy, you can get +1 dice pretty easily. Do I want a war token or do I want extra dice? I usually want an extra dice. The other thing I don't like about White Energy is that it's not controllable. Maybe you really want it on Morgok. You need it on him. If you get it on him, you can then push all your fighters forward and then make 3 charges. That's a great turn 1. If you get a wild token on Morgok, push everyone 2 hexes, and then you charge. You play White Energy, and then you miss on Morgok, hit the other 2. It's a good result on paper, but your game plan was to get it on Morgok. So I don't like that you can't control it. I don't like that it doesn't do anything else besides that. As far as tokens go, you get it every time you make an attack. So keep making attacks, obviously. And then basically once you get to 2, you want to start spending it. So on Morgok, it's kind of hard to use them on him because it takes an action. But it's more of a tool. Think about if you're not in a good position, okay, first activation, Morgok, he'll push everyone into position, and then I can make good actions. The other 2, I generally use them all the time. As soon as they inspire, I'll just start dumping them. +1 damage is good. Often I'll just throw an extra damage in there just to overkill something. There's a lot of math in the board, obviously. Like if they've got 4 wounds and you're doing 4 damage, I'll put +1 damage on there just to stop weird ploys that might -1 damage some factions can do. Like Rippers, for example, they can -1 damage. But if you do 5, -1's 4, they're still dead. And the other thing with using 1 is you get 1 back after you make the attack anyways. You're not really spending it. And then obviously with Hacker, with +1 dice, I will honestly look at my opponent's defense characteristic and try and get 3 or 4 dice more than what they're rolling. So if they're on shields, I'll aim for 4. If they're on dodges, I'll aim for 3. But if they're rolling 2 dodges, I'm going to be rolling 5 dice or 6 dice even. So I'll spend them pretty quickly. And after you make the attack, you get 1 back anyway for the next attack. So pretty easy to use there. But they're very much a core part of the team. They will inspire you, which makes your attacks a little bit better. Defensively, though, you're pretty much the same. It's down 5 wounds. You still have that shield for defense. So only really helps you become a little bit more accurate. So it's good. It's a nice buff. But I wouldn't go out of your way for it. It's nice, but there's better ways to get that on there with upgrades and ploys, if that makes sense. All right, next we're going to move on to the most important part of the warband. That was the precursor, that was your entree, this is the main meal, and that is movement efficiency. The most important thing in the world with Morgoks is thinking actually multiple turns ahead, because you need to get yourself into a good position now for this turn, as well as for future turns, because if you charge something that's really out of the way, and you can't make a second charge or get into the fight, you're kind of wasting a fighter on that. On this example here, we've got Starblood Stalkers versus Morgoks. You can see it on the table here. Very basic setup. I won't worry about objectives for now. There's an objective video that you can watch if you don't know much about that, but you know, I'm plugging everything, aren't I? The important thing here is we've got board placement, which is great. It makes it a lot easier to talk about theory. If it were offset, it'd be more complicated. We also need ploys then, because that's when you start getting a little bit more into, okay, Outrun Death, Special Rings, all those cards, and what do you have? Eternal Chase as well, great card for Morgoks. In fact, I think Eternal Chase is one of the best cards in the game for slow warbands because it stops your opponent from moving quick as well. Anyway, to this one. If you're looking at this position here, there's first thing when you deploy, there's a few choices you need to make, and that is with these two bad boys. These two are very different how they fight. Hacker, now I'm terrible with names, but Hacker, I believe, is better at killing small things, low wound things. He's more accurate. And this giant big club one is better for more damage, but less accurate. So when I look at this deployment, I've actually put Klaxtrock over here, just to show what I mean here. With Klaxtrock here, I can come into him with my 2-3 damage fighters and let Hacker come into Huachi there, for example. That's kind of the idea. Now, if it was swapped around a little bit, let's say it was a bit more like this, and I was deploying, well, I deploy first, so I don't really have a choice. But if they make a mistake, then I would actually put it a little bit differently. Morgok kind of always goes at the front because he's kind of just your best fighter. He has 3 damage, he gets all the dice, he has hammers at the start, which is great. But he's just your best sort of fighter early. But I would generally try and match up who you want for where. The next part is efficiency in activations. You get 4 activations. You have 3 fighters, which means 1 activation is going to be drawing a card or doing something that's not that interesting, assuming you haven't got any great ploys to help you out there. I mean, if you can put a War token on Morgok there, and you can push everyone in 2 hexes, let's say, you can have a pretty fantastic activation number 1 here, right? But let's say you don't. You have a choice. You can charge, and then draw a card. But all you're doing with that is giving your opponent an extra turn to deal with you. So first activation, look at your hand. Haven't got anything great here. Can't make anything work instantly. Let's just draw a card first. That means if he wants to kill you, he has to come to you. And if he does that, then you're feeling pretty happy because they're charging out of support range. You can just turn around and hit them. It's no problem at all. So draw a card first and then do your charges. Now, the charger order is important. There's a few things you need to consider here. The first one is who's in range and won't be for much longer. For example, in this setup here, if I look at this, we'll put Klaxtrock back like that. If I'm going now, let's say the board's like this, maybe we even move someone back to an objective there. Huachi here, if I'm the Seraphon player, I'm thinking, okay, activation 2, he's probably going to move Huachi away, right? Like he's in range there. If he moves him back there, it's a really good play for him. So my activation 2, I'm going to charge with Hacker almost always. Yeah, Klaxtrock's nice to kill. He's big and does a lot of damage, but I'd rather get 3 charges in a weird order than 2 charges in optimal order for what you're trying to do. So I will charge Hacker in first, and then I've got to think about, okay, activation 2, maybe, let's say you kill him, because, we're playing orcs, we just get kills all the time. Maybe we have a hit here, we get pushed back. Now I've got to think about this activation. Now we've actually moved the leader in here, done a charge, because he has good damage. Who do you charge in next? Well, if Klaxtrock moves away, let's say there's an objective back there, then suddenly Mr. Basher ain't going to get anywhere. So we have to move him in next, get his charge off. Maybe he fails, gets hit back, takes a lot of damage. Final activation, Morgok has 2 targets he can go for, has options. So just think about your order of activations clearly. Now, if you charge in on the first activation, so many players do this and it infuriates me. You got 3 fighters and you see this, you're like, man, I really want to get in there. Charge. You give them 4 activations to kill one of your fighters, or even 3 if you're going second. They kill him. They only have 5 wounds, 1 shield. That's not very good defensively. And if you charge, you can't do anything. So play it smart, play it slow, especially the first turn. If you've got a dead activation, try and take it at the start of the turn. The only time I wouldn't is if there's a free hit, like maybe they've started near me in whatever way and I can push them in range or something. And I think about activation all that way. The other thing is, whoever you charge in first is most likely gonna die the first, because what's gonna happen, if I charge you in, he is going to get hit by someone. They might charge onto an objective here and throw 1 damage onto him. They do 1 damage to him, maybe they drive him back, suddenly, he's got 1 damage, maybe 4 more, that's not too hard. And they'll start targeting the one that's taking the damage. Smart, gets rid of your fighters. But when you're playing against a certain warband, you need to identify which of your fighters is most effective at taking out their fighters. Do you need high damage? This bad boy is who you need exactly. Do you need, like, if 5, 6 damage, he's going to get there. Do you need to be hitting lots of small guys? You're playing against someone like Seraphon. Hacker's going to be the guy for that one. He's got the dice to make it happen. And Morgok is good at the middle ground. He's good at high damage. He can kill 4-wound fighters quite well with just 1+ damage. And he has quite a few dice. He gets 3 daggers when inspired. So he's a very good middle ground fighter. So they all have their own specific use. I would say if you're playing against someone, another Morgok's player, for example, keep him alive, or if there's a Kanan on the table or a Hrothgorn, he's going to kill him most likely second or third turn down the track. You've got to use your War tokens. And then against 7 or 8 fighter warbands, he's important. And then Morgok is just great all around. So keep Morgok up. The Morgok doesn't get the plus dice that Hacker gets. So, make sure you look at the differences there and play accordingly. So if I charge Hacker in first against Seraphon, and they come in, maybe Clacktrot does 4 damage to him, suddenly I'm in trouble because he's the one who later on in the game is going to be better at killing them. So that's that. The second part is obviously, where do you charge to? Now, the key thing I see some players do is charge into poor locations. Let's reset back to the start here. If I'm charging in with, let's say you're going in there. Now, I might do damage to Clacktrot. I probably don't kill him, but let's say I do damage and drive him back. Now, actually, let's look at the different spots I can charge here. It might be simple, but I can charge here or I can charge here. 3 range, right? Doesn't seem like that big a difference, but if I charge here, let's say we push him back, then Huachi comes over to an objective here and the leader goes back sort of to here. Suddenly that's not as good. If I was 1 hex closer, I could really drive into them and hit the core of what they're trying to do. Keep in mind that the lizards are generally trying to run away from you in most circumstances. The other thing is, with your fighters, think about who you're going to target next turn. So with Morgok, this is a better idea. I can charge him into Huachi right here if I want to. But let's say next turn I wanted to kill Autopaddle, who's sitting back here. Might be a little bit off camera. He's at the back of the board. Might shift this way a bit. Then I'd have to go through a lethal hex next turn, which isn't great. But if I just charged, either I could charge here. That'd be a decent one, and I'm closer to Autopaddle, 1, 2, 3. Or I can charge around to here. And this is obviously riskier because you're giving him a support and a free hit with Clacktrot. So there's lots of choices here. This is a decent choice here. You can charge to here. You put yourself next to a lethal and look at your ploys and upgrades to determine if that's worth it. But next turn, if you think about it, without going through that lethal, that might even drive you into it, which gives you the pick of the litter. If you think about it. You can hit Autopaddle easily. It's 2 hexes away. You can hit Tok over here, who's on the edge of the board, without having to go through the lethal. And you can hit every fighter from here. So think about when you charge doing that. Now, the other idea is, especially when playing against Starblood Stalkers, when they inevitably teleport to your backline with something like Beast Trail, what do you do about that guy? It's a bit tricky because let's say hypothetically you send Hacker back. Let's say he attacks him. Let's say he kills him, hypothetically. And then we send the other 2 forward into the enemy territory. Cool, turn 2 comes around. Great, okay, well they've probably moved back onto objectives. Clacktrot wouldn't, it's like this. Okay, Hacker, all right, 1, 2, 3. He's now here. And then let's say we kill Clacktrot because we're doing well, and maybe they kill Hacker as well. Let's say they kill, I forgot his name. He's got a helm. Hacker here hasn't got a charge for the third round. He spent 1 turn going backwards, and he spent 2 turns coming forwards, and he's completely out of the game. So by killing Tok, you've essentially taken Hacker completely out of the game on your own. If you told your opponent, hey, would you trade Tok for Hacker? I get glory, you don't. Would you take that deal? Every Seraphon player would say yes. So you essentially hurt yourself there. So when you turn around and go backwards, think about why you're doing that. And that also comes down to objective placement as well. When you are placing your objectives, they'll place them in their territory. You want to place them up front. Let's say you want to place them sort of in here. And the reason you do this is so that when they come back to this spot here, they're obviously trying to do it to stand on objectives, but obviously they're still going to have to come forward to you anyway. So you can let them come forward. Maybe you charge forward to here. You can go into enemy territory, but suddenly coming back for this objective here isn't as big a deal as it would be coming back to the edge of the board. So that's a lot of information I just dumped on you. I hope that makes sense. It's very complicated. The trick with Morgoks though is just think about your activation order. Think about who you're attacking and why you're attacking him, because you've got to make sure you're hitting the right fighters into the right enemies. And then you got to think about any positions that don't get you a good next turn. Charging backwards, charging the side of the board is generally bad. If you hit towards the middle of their territory, you'll be doing a lot better than you would if not. Moving on now, talking about upgrades and where to put them. Now, the key thing that we talked about just a moment ago was which fighter is most important for their warband. And we sort of talked a little bit about which orc is the best. Generally, you want to stack the orc that is, one, the most useful to keep alive for the match, and two, the least likely to die. If the orc you want to keep alive is, let's say it's Morgok, yeah, we'll give him a bit of shine, it's his warband, and he's taken 4 wounds, well, by putting upgrades on him, you're kind of inviting your opponent to kill him. But if you put him on one of your other 2 fighters that are full health, that's generally the way to do it. My first deck that I ran at the start of the year was an Avatar deck. And the key thing with Avatar is not letting the upgrades die, right? So what I would routinely do is first turn, I wouldn't play upgrades unless I absolutely needed them. Stuff like Brute Charge, I might put on someone just to get a bit of extra math, which we'll talk about in a moment. But I would wait, especially with the Urgrub cards, until right at the end of the turn, I would look at the board and say, okay, who is the least likely to die? Who can I keep alive this game? And it wasn't always Morgok. All 3 of these fighters have been Avatar in my games, and they can all do it. The upgrades are all work anyway, so don't feel like you always have to stack the same fighter. Think objectively. Okay, who's going to die in a moment? Because they will kill, generally in a lot of my games, they'll kill 1 to 2 orcs. They very rarely get all 3, but they will get 2 of them if they're decent at the game. So you've got to figure out which one is the third one that you're going to keep alive. The second one is who's the most useful one. So make sure you're putting upgrades in the right spot there. Feel free to hold your upgrades for a bit, dump them when you're ready, and don't feel like you need to instantly get them on the table if you don't have to. The last point I'm going to make here is know your math. It seems complicated, but when you are rolling dice, you need to know your percentages. So if I'm charging into Klaxrock here with 2 hammers, 2 daggers into 1 shield, that attack's not going to get through most of the time. I'd say it's about 45-40%. So I charging that there, thinking that this isn't actually going to do any damage. I'm not hoping for, I'm hope for damage, I know, but my strategy can't be to do damage there because that's a losing strategy. You'll lose more often than you win if you do that. But if I've suddenly got a few upgrades and I'm doing 5 hammers at him, for example, let's say I've done that, I've played some cards, 5 hammers versus 1 shield, it's like 70-80%. So know your matchups and your math and look at what upgrades they've got. If you've got auto paddle there with 4 defense, let's say he's got an extra defense from a card, and he's on guard, like, okay, if you haven't got cleave and snare, even if you do, it's still hard, but if you haven't got cleave and snare, that's almost impossible for you to kill. So don't waste your activation or even your charge by going for it. If you're sitting next to auto paddle with 4 defense on guard, and you don't even need a charge to hit him, it still might not be the right play to hit him because you are wasting one of your 4 activations. And once you hit him once, you'll want to hit him again, and you'll waste the whole turn doing it. And these little skinks that have 1 defense running around the board hitting the objectives, they'll do great things for the opponents. So think about your math, know your numbers. If you are making, it's okay to make charges that are Hail Marys, but don't do them early in the game. Think about better plays if you have them. And if you don't, it's better to charge than not most of the time with warbands. But really understand when you charge something what your chances are. And if it's a low chance, especially underneath 50%, go, I'm making this charge not because I need to kill that thing, but because I actually want to set up for the next turn. It's always a setup charge. So make sure you take your math that way. The way I see Morgoks losing a lot is people charging the wrong things. They roll their dice. Oh, I didn't roll any hits on my 2 daggers. Oh no, that bad dice, that sucks. When in reality, they should have been thinking a bit better than that. Anyway, that's my strategy video on Morgok's Krushas. A lot of those strategies you kind of apply to a lot of aggro warbands. I've kind of lost my voice talking about that now, but that's okay. But I hope you guys learned a bit out of it. I've tried to share sort of my experiences with them. They are a very slow warband, but they're also very hard to kill. You won't give up primacy very often with them, I'll tell you that. But I think they're fantastic. They're a lot of fun. And actually by playing them, you kind of learn a lot about movement, distances and locations and trying to zone people out. Sometimes for the wrong reasons, sometimes you're getting zoned out, but positioning with an aggro warband is very key. And with Morgoks, you don't have the leniency like you do with Rippers to just charge anywhere you want and then get anywhere you want next activation. So you have to think ahead and think smart. And I hope that you have learned a lot and can take something away. You can play some games with Morgoks and be a little bit more successful than what you were before this video. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next week.